being joined tonight by Ryan O'Hara, man. We appreciate your time tonight, Ryan.
Anytime, man. And welcome to another edition of Power Punchers, brought to you by the sport of boxing.
That's that radio voice.
We couldn't do it. We couldn't do it without the sport of boxing. It is true.
That's that radio voice right there. And we wanted to bring you on, give you a fresh perspective, because there's a lot going on out there with Canelo, Caleb Plant. A lot of people have opinions on things, which none of us have seen the contract. So none of us know exactly what happened, right? But everybody has an opinion. And we wanted to bring you on to give yours because there was a lot of back and forth with people on Twitter. So we wanted to bring you on here to give sort of your opinion on what happened. First of all, what exactly happened from your sources that you're hearing from last week to this week?
Well, initially I was told that the fight was 100% happening, but there were a few minor details, that needed to be amended that had, no impact on the fight. It turned out those minor details were actually pretty damn huge, which nothing surprises us in boxing anymore. So from what I understand, Caleb Plant, if what Caleb is saying is true, he agreed to his part of the agreement weeks ago. He's going to get 10 million. Canelo's going to get 40 million. But then Canelo wanted to add some more stipulations after the fact. So they were like, well, he wanted more of the upside of the pay-per-view revenue. Caleb's like, yeah, no problem. I mean, I kind of figured that I was going to get less of the pay-per-view revenue anyway. And the next thing was the rematch clause. If Canelo loses, he gets a rematch. Okay, cool. I just want to fight. Now, where it gets really weird is the injury clause. Now, if what Caleb is saying is true, if Canelo were to get injured, regardless of whatever it is, he gets sick, a statue falls in his hand, like with Carl Frampton, car accident, you never know. Things happen. And let's say he needs a year off to recover. If Caleb Plant signs that contract under those circumstances, he has to wait that entire time. He can't fight anybody. Mm-hmm. But if Canelo Alvarez gets hurt, if Caleb Plant were to get injured, Canelo gets to, pick a replacement opponent. They didn't say who. It could be Golovkin, could be Anthony Durrell. He gets to fight that person for the same pay. So he still gets the $40 million payment. Now, imagine you're in Al Heyman's shoes and, Canelo, you always get mixed up these names, but Plant gets injured. And the only person available to fight at the time is Anthony Durrell. If you're Heyman, would you want to pay Canelo $40 million to fight Anthony Durrell on Fox pay-per-view? That sounds like a nightmare. That sounds like a financial disaster, regardless of who you are. No one, people want to watch Canelo fight, but they do not want to pay $80, $85, could be $100 to watch him fight Anthony Durrell. We all know how that fight's going to go. So that's the major issue that is popping up. I think the fight will still happen, but you got to put the egos aside. So Canelo's side has to realize, okay, well, if Plant gets hurt and you're going to fight someone less, you're not going to get 40 million, but we can make a deal. Let's make it 20, 25, 30. We'll find somebody. DAZN mentioned that they had already contacted Gennady Golovkin about potentially stepping in for a third fight if, Plant is unable to fight him. And from what I'm hearing from my sources, Gennady's actually been training pretty hard, just in case he gets the call. And obviously he has the fight coming up with Murata. I believe it's going to be December 28th, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that, egos getting in the way, and that's a big problem, when it comes to boxing promoters and networks these days. Egos gets in the way of pretty much anything. And when this sort of thing happens, especially when we're talking undisputed, because, if Caleb Plant fights someone else, ends up fighting somebody else and loses, well, now we're not talking about undisputed, and you add different fighters, it gets messed up. You look at the Joshua Wilder situation. We had an opportunity 4 years ago to have two undefeated heavyweights in their prime for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. That went by the wayside because of egos. And I think that, if people just, did the right thing, we would get these fights.
Now, a couple of things. So when it comes to the injury clause, right, the way I from what I've seen, I don't really think it's made or intended in any way, shape, or form. I could be wrong, of course, but I don't think it's intended to keep Caleb sitting on his hands and he's doing nothing for a year or months. Or I don't think it's intended for that at all. I think it's intended if I get a training injury, which usually could postpone it a couple months, or if I get COVID or something like that, which could postpone it a month and a half, 2 months. I think the intent is to keep the fight intact in case Canelo, who is the draw on the A side in this case, who is the attraction in this case, to keep it alive. I think that's the intention behind it. I don't think the intention is if I if I get in a car crash and I'm in a coma for 9 months, Plant, you can't fight anybody. I don't think it's made. Something just tells me there's no way like it's intended for that. I'm not saying it's impossible that could be a scenario, but I just don't think it's intended for that at all. Now on the Plant side, look, or the Canelo side, he's saying, look, if I get injured, I of course, or Plant, I'm sorry, because that's two scenarios. I apologize. If Plant gets, injured, then what Canelo is saying is the following, and I'm putting it in myself because I understand you're saying put yourself in Al Heyman's shoes. Understandable. But let me put myself in Canelo's shoes. Canelo could make 25 to 30 million on the zone guaranteed right now if he wants to in September. He could fight Beterbiev. He could fight Bivol. He has a lot of options. He doesn't need Plant like that. He doesn't need Fox like that. He doesn't need PBC like that. I understand 40 million is more, but look at it this way. Let's say he gets 30 million to fight Beterbiev, guaranteed on the zone, right? September, then he comes back and gets another 25, 30 million to fight in December, right? Mm-hmm. Where in the other scenario, if Plant gets injured, oh, now I need to wait for this guy, and then I postpone the fight for another 2 months. So he can actually make less if Plant gets injured. He can actually lose money if Plant gets injured. So I'm looking at it from his perspective. Well, I think the way he's looking at it is this way. I'm sure Showtime didn't really want the Berto fight with Mayweather, but they had a guarantee with him. They had to do it. I'm sure they probably didn't want the Robert Guerrero fight, but they kind of had to do it. All he is saying is this. I want 40 million guaranteed because I don't need to leave. I'm good where I'm at. I'm making good money. So you got to pay me more for me to come to you. I want 40 million guaranteed. And if your guy gets injured or pulls out of this fight, I still want the 40 million guaranteed if you want me on pay-per-view. And I understand, the Al Heyman perspective, but hey, the way I see it, if that's too much of a hassle or a problem, then let's do the fight on the zone then. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's how I see it.
That's another way. But like I said, it's really, really risky. If Plant were to get hurt for any reason, I think financially it wouldn't be viable. Now, it could go into zone. If you put it on, if you put the replacement fight onto zone, that would make sense. For example, you get rid of the Fox pay-per-view. Perhaps you get the third Golovkin fight. Golovkin's with the zone. That would make sense. And Beterbiev's with the ESPN. That might be a little bit harder to make. And from what I'm hearing, Canelo is starting to. I've heard on the inside, Beterbiev is actually starting to have problems making weight. And if you look at guys who have problems making weight over time, what are they most vulnerable to? Shots to the body. Who's the best body puncher in boxing? Canelo Alvarez. I say Canelo takes out Beterbiev late to the body if they fight. I think that he might get dropped early in that fight. Beterbiev is one of the strongest punchers in boxing, but he is a little bit chinny, as we saw against Callum Johnson.
Let me throw this out there. I don't know if y'all caught the live stream on DAZN today. Eddie Hearn does a weekly live stream. He said that Bivol will be. That's an option. Bivol would be the main option that they talked to with Eddie Reynoso if this fight were to fall through. But he's still, Caleb Plant is still very much in the mix, just not for September 18th. So it seems like maybe that fight will back up a couple weeks, but they're still trying to do it. It seems to me like Eddie Hearn is just backing up a little bit and saying, Canelo wants this fight. I'm not going to let my ego get in the way. He said, I'm not going to throw my toys around a playpen. I'm just going to let Canelo and Eddie Reynoso try to make this fight because that is still option A for Canelo from what Eddie Hearn said today. So it still doesn't seem to me like the fight is completely dead. But Bivol is still there as the option. That seems like the number one option if this fight were to fall through. Here's my issue. Once I heard that Al Heyman was running point guard on this fight, I got that sinking feeling in my stomach because it's so easy. Like Canelo and Eddie have shown that they could make fights in short order. Canelo made a fight in December. He made a fight in February. He made a fight in May. Back to back to back. They're wheeling and dealing. Canelo has shown that he'll make fights with people that stylistically don't match up well with him. So he has a track record of making fights, right? Whereas Caleb Plant, his side, Al Heyman, not so much. You look at Caleb Plant's resume, not so much. Al Heyman, not so much. This is the third time they tried to make this fight. So you can play the devil's advocate. Maybe Canelo doesn't want to make the fight with Caleb Plant. But I see it the opposite way. Al Heyman seems to be the poison pill here, in my opinion, in making this fight happen. Once I heard that he was the guy running point guard on this fight, I just got that sinking feeling. I wanted Eddie Hearn to run the point guard because this fight could easily get made. And it seems to me like if Caleb Plant wants this fight, he would have told Al Heyman, he would have took control of his career and said, Al, can you step aside on this and just let Eddie Hearn run point guard in this? Because there's no doubt in my mind, even if Eddie Hearn would have ran point guard, Caleb Plant still would have got $10 million. He still would have got his $10 million. That's just my opinion on it. We can talk about the guarantee. He wants to get $40 million guaranteed to fight anybody, all that stuff. But the reason we're here, in my opinion, is because of Al Heyman. That's the reason we're still here in late July for a fight that's supposed to be September 18th. That's just my opinion on it.
Well, Al Heyman is fighting for his guy. And if, Heyman wasn't trying to, get the right deal, then he's not doing his due diligence. He's a business guy. He's defending his guy. And I understand that. And if, from my perspective, people call me, oh, you're a fan of this organization, this promoter, I'm just a realist. If I saw the injury clause, it's like, oh, if my guy gets hurt, you can't fight until he's good. I probably wouldn't be okay with that. I think that's too risky. I feel like we should just cut the BS. Let's just fight for the undisputed championship, and whoever wins gets the belt. I think that would be the most logical explanation. But this is the sport of boxing, and as we all know, it is very complicated.
You got anything to add on the Al Heyman thing, D-Style?
Well, I mean, I think we've said what we've said. I think we all kind of agree on mostly everything for the most part, I think. It's just, to me, well, I understand that Al Heyman's looking out for his guy and all that. I get it. But they also have to be, in my opinion, it's just my opinion, they have to be realistic on the position they're in. Like, they're just not in a position of power. I've given this analogy, and I think it's pretty spot on. It's like Canelo and Plant are playing poker, right? And right now, Canelo has almost practically all the chips. He has the legacy chips. He has the cash cow chips. He has the 3 of the 4 belts chips, right? I mean, he's got the back end chips. If you beat him, you become a megastar chips. He's got all these chips on the table, right? And he's sliding them in the middle of the table with conditions, of course, but he's sliding them to the table, and he's telling Plant, that chip you got, because Plant only got 1 chip. It's the IBF chip, and he needs it to be undisputed. So it's important. It's an important chip, but I want that chip. So throw that thing in the middle of the table, and let's get this deck of cards out, and whoever wins takes it all. That's how I feel about it, and I think people got to be realistic on where Canelo is, and I'll ask you this, Ryan, because you've covered boxing for a while, like, and maybe you disagree, or maybe you will agree. I don't know. Isn't Canelo one of the most generous A sides you've ever seen? To me,
I don't know about generous. I mean, I can't really grade anybody on generosity. I haven't really put that into mind. The way I look at it right now is that if you have a legitimate concern over fighting somebody, that's when stipulations come in. So, for example, when Oscar De La Hoya fought Floyd Mayweather, he knew Floyd Mayweather was going to be really, really hard to beat. So what do? Move up to my weight class. That was one stipulation. Okay, I'm going to pick the gloves that you want. I'm going to pick the size of the gloves that you want. That was Oscar saying, okay, you're in my house now. I control everything. Now, was there a rematch clause for the Canelo Alvarez fight? There was not. Was there a rematch clause for the Yildirim fight? Of course not. Canelo knew right away he was gonna run him over. They already had the Saunders fight signed before they even fought that night. And some people ask me, well, for mandatory fights, is there usually isn't a rematch clause? Yes, that is true. However, there is a rematch clause in place for the Joshua Usyk fight, which is also a mandatory. So that's not always true. So it really depends. And there wasn't a rematch clause for the Lomachenko-Lopez fight because Bob Arum didn't want one. Bob Arum typically doesn't like rematch clauses, even though sometimes his fights do come with rematch clauses. So in this case, another stipulation, as I mentioned earlier, if Canelo loses the fight, he gets a rematch. If Plant loses, he doesn't get a rematch. So automatically, in my mind, yes, there is some sort of concern that Caleb Plant is going to be a really difficult fight. And compared to the likes of Smith and Saunders, I believe that Caleb's speed, his jab, and his movement could trouble Canelo to an extent. I still think Canelo's going to win the fight. People get this mistaken. Oh, you think Caleb's going to win? I think Canelo will win, but it's going to be like a 7-5, 8-4 type of fight. It's going to be close. It's going to be a lot closer than you think. That's just styles. Styles make fights. And I think there's a legitimate concern that, maybe Canelo might not look as good as he has looked in previous fights, but that doesn't mean that Canelo is necessarily, diminishing. It means he's getting challenged. So when you see like Golovkin in his prime, when he destroyed, Marco Antonio Rubio or Matthew Macklin, but then, he looked somewhat quote unquote human against Daniel Jacobs, that's just stepping up in competition. And that's what boxing's all about. It's about, taking on the best opponents.
I guess what I'm trying to get at when I say generally, I'm talking about the amount of money the B-side makes, right?
Yeah. Like, I went on a different tangent, but Canelo has lowballed guys in the past, but I don't really rate it on generosity. But if you look at it, I'd say this is more of a generous split. But the reason why this is more of a generous split is because Caleb Plant, first of all, didn't demand too much money. He could have said, we're going for the undisputed championship. I want $20 million. Canelo probably would have laughed at that. But Caleb was respectful. He's like, well, I don't want to price myself out. I think 10 million is good. Daniel Jacobs and Sergey Kovalev made 12 million to fight Canelo. And Caleb's like, I want 10. It's undisputed. He could have requested a lot more, but he didn't. And I feel like that aspect of it, the pay, that's why it got done so quick, is because Caleb didn't price himself out.
What I'm trying to get at is, like, I understand that it's for undisputed, but Caleb didn't really do, other than holding the IBF belt, he hasn't really. It's not exactly Ramirez Tater where they both like met halfway with it. Like they both put work, they both be champions, they both like did all that. It kind of just like Caleb, it's just the last fight he's unifying, but he's not doing anything different than Smith or Billy Joe did, really. I mean, he's just the guy that's holding a belt. It just happens to be the last one.
Yeah,
right.
Well, 168 isn't exactly a deep division. It's actually probably one of the worst divisions in boxing, if you ask me, to be honest.
Well, that's what I mean, and he should be very fortunate. All I'll say is this: I don't know exactly who it is that Canelo lowballed, but I mean, if you go down the line, almost all his opponents saw their best payday, right? Mm-hmm. Fighting Saul Canelo Alvarez.
Well, I mean, if you're a top fighter, making a lot of money, even if you lowball somebody, it's still probably going to be their best payday. But, that doesn't necessarily mean that lowballing is impossible. Now, another point, I'm trying to think about this one, but trying to recall. But, Canelo is, he's the biggest star in boxing. So naturally he has that leverage. But he really wants that undisputed belt. So I think, what was up? You want to say something?
Yeah, one last thing I want to throw out as far as track record. Canelo also has on his track record that he's willing to be the B-side and get a small split. You look at Mayweather versus Canelo. Mayweather got 41.5 guaranteed. Canelo got 5. All right. So small percentage. we're in a similar situation here. He could have said, Caleb, you're getting $5 million. I got 7 other guys right there lined up with their hands up in the air, ready to fight me, that the boxing world would want to see. But Caleb does bring something to the table, obviously, undisputed. But generous, $10 million is generous. It's generous. It's very generous. So I just look at track record. To me, this smells like Al Heyman. It just smells like Al Heyman is doing his work in the background. And if Eddie Hearn was in charge of this, if Eddie Hearn was point guard in this, I think this fight would be made already. I think we'd already be promoting the fight.
Oh, absolutely. And there's no doubt about that. But I mean, that's what happens when you're with different promoters. And that's just the environment that we're in right now. And I guess at this point, we just have to accept it unless we do something to fix it. Mm-hmm. And another thing I wanted to mention, people want to ask, Caleb Plant doesn't have the best resume. Well, before the invention of sanctioning bodies, when they actually did stuff that actually helped the sport, because right now they really don't. But Winky Wright, no one wanted to fight Winky Wright until finally the one sanctioning body was like, fight this guy, man. We're forcing you to fight Winky Wright. If that didn't happen, Winky Wright probably never would have made in the Hall of Fame because he was that dangerous. Mike McCallum too. Marvin Hagler didn't want to fight him. Sugar Ray Leonard didn't want to fight him. And, and despite that, he still had some great fights. James Toney, I'm
glad you mentioned that. I'm glad you mentioned that because it seems to me that the biggest problem I had with the franchise belt was that it's doing the opposite of forcing these guys to fight the contenders, whoever they may be. Where do you personally stand with the franchise belt? And do you believe what I said? I said this when it first came out. It started as a joke. I said, watch, it's going to be in every division. But then I just learned you should never joke in boxing because then it happens, right? And you should never say, I can't get any worse than this in boxing either. Like you never say those two things. Do you think we'll have a franchise champion in every division like we have a super champion now with the WBA at some point?
Not. I hope not, man. I would be surprised. But I remember I was driving to Phoenix and I heard from the inside, oh, Khan's going to fight Canelo. And I literally put on like a SpongeBob video and I was like, what the? And then actually, you gotta be kidding me. I was like, dude, Khan will win. I literally said this on like one of the shows. I was like, yeah, Khan will win the first 5 rounds. Then he's going to get knocked out in round 6. And that's kind of what happened. But as far as the franchise belt's concerned, I'm honest. I'll say this from an objective standpoint. I actually think the intention of the franchise belt was actually good. You're rewarding like your best fighter by saying, okay, you don't have to follow our rules because you're so good. But then it opened a whole big can of worms. The problem is, I feel like that a lot of these guys that run these sanctioning bodies, they kind of think that their ideas are like, oh, and then it turns out to be horrible, absolutely terrible. So now, if someone's the franchise belt and someone remotely imposing wants to fight him, he can choose not to fight him because you are now at the top of the throne. That's garbage. Hate that.
Well, I just feel like that's not their job. Like that's the promoters. Let them promote, and this guy's so great. Let the promoters do all that. Your job as a sanctioning body shouldn't be promoting, which I felt WBC did way too much. And we keep it real. They did a lot early in Canelo's career, right? They were promoting the guy. They put the belt on him and gleefully said, "Hey, sell seats." I mean, that's all we had him fight Matthew Haddon for the belt. Like, you know what I mean? We didn't care if he didn't make the contracted weight. Like, we want the belt on him. He's a superstar. Like, you know what I mean? That's literally what Suleiman said, Jose. Like,
I forgot about that Matthew Haddon.
Yeah, I think I was a junior in high school when that fight happened. Him and Matthew Haddon. It was a long time ago.
Well, Jose Suleiman on Mexican television was called out by Marquez, ironically, and he literally just said, look, I mean, he's a superstar. Like we need to put belts on superstars. That's what he said. And even if you privately think that, I don't think they should be like. It just seems like they don't even hide it anymore. In other words, you know what I mean? And I think that's a problem.
Oh no, at the Ring magazine, we've been having to come up with different names for titles. So we've been using secondary title, and it got to the point where I even had to use the words tertiary title. It's got ridiculous, but now yeah, because it's 3 levels down. But now I was just told no one cares. Like we're not recognizing those belts anymore. So we only go for the the super duper champion at this point.
All right. Well, Ryan, I'm gonna give you give us one last word, just on your whole feeling of this. Do you think this fight gets made?
I think this fight gets made. I mean,
Maybe for October, right? Probably for October now.
I really hope they make it for September 18th. You got to think Mexican Independence Day, and this wouldn't be the first time that a deal wasn't made in Mexican Independence Day for Canelo, and that led to a lot of harsh comments from his fellow countrymen. I feel like Canelo was personally bothered by that, honestly, because I know he carries that, and especially because you remember when Gennady Golovkin was saying, "Well, I have more Mexican fans than him," and that didn't go so well. Right. And I think Canelo wants to make the fight for September 18th, even though they may not have enough time to quote unquote promote. But you're the biggest star in boxing. That gives you huge leverage, and I don't think they should use that as an excuse to push the fight back. I think they'll be just fine having it on September 18th as long as they get it done within the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Ryan O'Hara Sports on Twitter and Ring Magazine. Appreciate your time, man. Really appreciate it.
You guys have a good night.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye, Ryan.
See you, man.